I always talk about the psychological aspects of this and the psychosocial aspects. You can think about personalities involved. And when I think about cities and countries, I think about the collective personality. And I do believe we teach people how to treat us. I think we teach them how to treat us individually, whether you're talking about somebody on an elevator or cutting in front of you in line at a movie or a relationship you're in. And I think the same thing is true on the international stage. These countries are run by people, and people have personalities, and I think we do teach people how to treat us. You said it for me. If you have somebody lob 130 missiles at you and hundreds of armed drones, and they're not very good at it, so it doesn't inflict much damage. And so you go, well, no, no harm, no foul. You just say, well, I'm not going to respond to that. You're just asking them to try harder, try better. There's no consequence for it. And I think you can't reward bad behavior. And that's bad behavior when you send missiles at Israeli citizens. If there's no consequence to it, you're rewarding bad behavior. If that happens, you're inviting it to happen again. So there has to be some response to it where, like you say, they've got to say, that was not worth it. A, we're apparently not very good at it. And B, that was really painful. We did that and didn't get anything out of it. And the response was very painful, whether it's blowing up their oil fields or whatever inflicts the most pain. But I agree with you. You certainly don't want to start World War III, but we didn't start this. I mean, they started this, but something has to be done. And if you don't, you're just inviting, psychologically, you're endorsing it and inviting it to occur again. Am I wrong about that?
I would agree with you. The Israelis need to respond so they can ensure that this does not ever happen again. They have to reset the level of deterrence, where the Iranians thought that this was not going to be something that would lead to a war. However, they also thought that because of what's taking place in Gaza, that Israel may not respond. And that was a miscalculation on their part. But while I use the word miscalculation, let me talk further about some of the concerns about what could happen. Right? Most of the wars in world history were started by miscalculations.
Right.
And so what we need to be careful of, and certainly what I advise my colleagues in the Israeli Defense Forces to be careful of, is that there is not a miscalculation that could be causing future war. So let's talk about a couple scenarios. First, I would say what the United States does well, and the Israelis did this in their previous experiences also, is to take a beat or take a breath. There is no reason to rush into a response today or tomorrow, because Israel knows it has superior capabilities to the Iranians. Just on the most basic sense of military, the Iranians used missiles and drones because their Air Force has a technology level of flying F-14s from the 1980s, like you saw in the first Top Gun movie, not the second. Israel clearly flies the most sophisticated technology in aircraft and has the ability to do different things, as does the United States. So take a beat, take a minute before making a decision about what to do. Second, any response should be seen as one that is trying to reset that deterrence from the Iranians, but should not try to invite an additional response or retaliation from them. So this is where the term miscalculation comes into effect. As we go up this escalation ladder and Israel responds as they need to reset the deterrence like we spoke about a minute ago, they should be extra diligent in ensuring that the loss of life does not exceed large numbers. Now, I want to be careful in saying any loss of life is horrible,
Of course.
But sadly, in war, people lose their lives. And Israel, if they respond by hitting an Iranian military base where those missiles were fired from, or they respond by hitting some other Iranian military target, they should do so without trying to kill a large number of people. Because let's think about it in two scenarios. One, they hit an Iranian military target and there's one or two guards there. Those one or two guards, obviously, they have lost their lives, and that is a casualty of war. But if for some reason there happens to be 30 or 40 people that are there and they get killed when the Israelis respond, then the Iranians are going to feel the need for them to respond as well. That would have been a miscalculation by the Israelis. We know that second to the United States, Israel has some of the best intelligence capabilities and reconnaissance capabilities of any nation around the world. We want to ensure that they are using those capabilities, that when they retaliate and when they respond, that they do so in a way that they are not escalating this with a potential for miscalculation. So response is necessary, but what I would call is intelligence response, protecting against miscalculation.
Right. From where you sit, the Iranians had to think 3 or 4 plays ahead in this and know whatever they did, however successful it had to be, it was, they had to predict that Israel is going to respond. They can't think we're going to send over 130 missiles and several hundred drones against Israeli civilians, and whatever the success rate is, they're just going to go, well, wish you hadn't done that. They're going to know Israel is going to respond. What do you think they predict Israel is going to do?
So I try to stay out of the business of predicting what's in the mind of the Ayatollah. In international relations that I spent years studying, you talk about rational actors and irrational actors. I do think that the Ayatollah is rational. However, I think he is willing to use irrational means to get to rational ends. And what I mean by that is, well, he's not completely irrational, something that would concern us even further. And we can talk about that in a future conversation. I do believe that the Iranians understood that the Israelis would retaliate. And I will say to you that, the Iranians knew the capabilities of the Israeli counter-rocket and counter-missile system. I think they thought a lot more of their 130 missiles were going to hit their targets than actually did.
Mm-hmm.
So let's play that scenario out. Obviously, it would have been horrible for Israel should that have taken place. But even if 20% of those 130 missiles hit, you now have 26 missiles hitting Israeli targets, and you know that people would have been killed. And to your question earlier, DrPhil, they had to know there would be a response and retaliation for 26 missiles hitting Israelis.
Right.
And so now the question becomes, what can Israel do to have an intelligent response that makes sure they set up the deterrent again without going too far for the chance of miscalculation and continued escalation.
Is it reasonable to consider going at some of their industrial complex in terms of hitting an oil field or something like that to cripple their economy in some way?
I'm going to leave the specific targets to the Israelis to decide how they would like to do it. I think if I'll give you my perspective. Again, I'm not currently in the United States government serving the Department of Defense, but my sense from looking at it, the private sector, previously serving at the Department of Defense at the Pentagon, it would be our goal to hit military targets, specifically those military targets that took part in firing 130 missiles at Israel. And therefore, if there are still people that are there and there are casualties based on them serving as part of their military service, then those are casualties of war. I'm not sure that I would be personally advocating for shooting at their industrial base or oil fields, because I think there is, as we would say at the Pentagon, a target-rich environment in Iran of plenty of military targets to hit.
Yeah, that's true. Are they likely, as they have done in Gaza, told people, "We're gonna hit here, you need to get out of there"? Are they likely to try and avoid loss of life by saying, "We know where these came from, and we're getting ready to hit that target"?
I would say that the Israelis have gone to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties when they are hitting targets. And you mentioned a couple different ways in Gaza that includes dropping leaflets to neighborhoods, as well as using something that they call the knock, which is a non-explosive ordnance that can be dropped on the top of a building. And when it falls like a anvil falling on the top of a building, it makes a loud noise. And it is a warning that next round will be not just a loud anvil, but an actual explosive device. So there are some things that they have done to take extraordinary means to avoid civilian casualties. I will tell you that my concern as it relates to Iran is that attacking a country as far away as Iran is from Israel is a very difficult military concept. We sometimes take for granted in the United States that we can fight a war anywhere around the world, and that's mainly due to our aircraft carriers and our Navy's ability to go anywhere and to bring the war machine wherever it needs to go. Israel is a smaller nation and with a very strong and powerful military, but they do not employ aircraft carriers. And so those types of attacks and those types of responses, they take a great deal of planning and a great deal of effort. And direct answer to your question is I'm not sure they want to telegraph that because they want to make sure that they are successful.
Yeah. Well, I hope, and I'm curious as we conclude, that I can get your thought on this. They have done a service in getting, I think, a flip for Israel in maybe flipping the script back and getting some of those that were kind of moving out of the Israel camp and leaning on them to do a ceasefire, to back off of Hamas, and not really standing strong with Israel. And it seems like they've certainly solidified some of the allies behind Israel again. Do you think that'll last?
Well, I would say that Iran attacking Israel was a mistake. It was a mistake because they have now shown that they are willing to step out from behind the curtain where they've been hiding behind those proxies and firing from Lebanon, Gaza, and Yemen. And now the world knows Iran for who it is, and the Israelis see that the Iranians are willing to actually attack their own territory. And the Israelis will now be able to respond to reestablish that deterrence. But they have also, as you just stated, brought the world to support Israel once again in the face of Iran. And I think the Israelis understand that, and the Iranians misunderstood that, where they saw some in Europe as well as some parts of the United States not supporting Israel in what's taking place in Gaza. And now they have reversed that by bringing both the Europeans and others in the region to stand up against Iran alongside Israel. They have done more to help Israel gain the diplomatic support that may have been somewhat decreasing than they ever planned for. And that was their true failure in their attack on Israel on Saturday.
Well, as you say, miscalculation. I would love to have been a fly on the wall with the military commanders and the Ayatollah the next morning for the debrief to say, well, here's here here's how this all came down. We did all this, we did all that, and we did hit a girl with some shrapnel, but she seems like she's going to be okay. other than that, we've pissed off everybody, and they've lined back up with Israel. Other than that, I don't seem like we've achieved much. I'd have loved to have been a fly on that wall.
Well, as we learned in the U.S. military and Department of Defense, there is not a lot of honesty in failed military operations. And what I mean by that is, if we look back at Saddam Hussein's army in Iraq, his spokesman used to say that they were winning the war against the United States. And if you remember those videos behind him, where U.S. tanks were rolling into the town behind him, but he would
Yeah.
stand on television and say that they were winning.